My next project, Superman. Hey guys, and welcome to another Interstellar Modeler. In this video, I'm going to change gears and try my hand again at building another figure model. And if you haven't built one, this genre of model making is a little less about assembly and more about painting. You spend most of your time painting shadows and highlights and blending colors together to try to make that figure look as realistic as possible. Now, I've only done a few figures, and these include this AMT figure of Dr. McCoy, this one of the Invisible Man, and this small kit that I found late last year on eBay. It's a 75mm medieval figure that kind of looks like Little John from Robin Hood, and it was a lot of fun to paint in detail. So in this video, I'm going to build this kit that you see here. It is a 1/9 scale kit of Superman. This is the Man of Steel version, and this of course is the film that starred Henry Cavill as the famous superhero. And I found this kit in Hong Kong earlier this year, and believe it or not, I paid less than 15 bucks for this kit. So let's go ahead and take a look inside before we get started. Okay, well, as you can see by the instructions, as I mentioned, there's really not a lot to assembling the model kit. You can see it comes with suggestions for the paints, which I already know what paints I'm going to be using for this. We've got the cape, which is nicely sculpted. This should be fun painting and adding the shadows and highlights too. Body pieces, I've already taken out of the bag. Let me just kind of show you here. They come molded with the surface detailing that you see on the suit. This is, of course, the upper thigh. Here's the other one here. And we have his boots. And the rest of him is here. And this is the head, which isn't a terrible sculpt, but I've been told that by a couple people who have built this model, they've had some issues with the paint sticking to the material they've made this out of. So it's been suggested that I use an enamel primer, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'll be starting first with painting the face and detailing that, and then we'll move on to the main body. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, you can see the head is now primed and ready to go. I ended up using Stynylres's gray primer after all. I did start off with an enamel primer, but I gave that a day to dry and it still stayed tacky, so I decided just to scrub it off with purple power, and I applied the Stynylres and gave it enough time to dry, and it looks like it's on here pretty well, so hopefully we won't have any issues. Now, before I start here, I wanted to make mention of a gentleman named Darren Carnell. If you are all interested in this subject, I would recommend checking out his YouTube and Patreon channel. He's got quite a few videos there, and he is an expert at painting these sorts of things. He's very meticulous at what he does. Just amazing stuff. And so I took the liberty of watching a number of his videos and am taking up his suggestions on the colors to start with here. I'm not going to go step by step according to what his videos showed, but I definitely will be following a lot of his suggestions. So the first step is to create a base coat, and I'm going to make it out of a mixture of this beige red, which is really going to be the majority of the color, but a drop of this sunny skin tone and a little bit of vermilion red, and I'm going to thin that down and apply 2 to 3 coats to start with. Alright, so here we now have the face after a few coats of the base color. You can still see a little bit of gray peeking through, but that's okay. The next step now is to use a mix of beige red and light flesh. This is going to be just a little bit lighter tone than the base color, and I'm going to dry brush that along, particularly hitting the peaks and high points of the face. Shade the light a little bit here, so hopefully you can see a bit of contrast now where I've applied the dry brushing. And what I'm going to do is let this dry, and we're going to apply a brown wash. So after the brown wash, I ended up doing a bit more work with a beige red and salmon rose mix to apply along the cheeks. And then I used a blue-gray and red mix to add some purplish color around the eyes here, as well as the lips. Okay, this is how the face is looking here so far. I'm going to give this some time to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to actually apply the first coat of the hair color. I'm going to start off with this black-brown. So the next step here is I made a mixture of this sunny skin tone along with beige red, and I'm just going to lightly add some splotches here and there. The purpose for that is to make the color look a little more realistic. Human skin tends to not be completely uniform, so that's the idea behind doing this. So while I'm giving the face time to dry here, I'm going to go ahead and show you how easy it is to put the body together. This, of course, is the main torso. The limbs just slide right into place. And I got his forearms here. Okay, and then the bottom half just comes together this way, slides into here, and then we have his boots. And that's all there is to it. So as we look at it closely here, we can see there's a gap along here. There's definitely gaps along the forearms. And the waist doesn't look too bad. There's pretty much a tight fit there, but we got a gap here and just some small gaps along the tips of the boots here. So the plan is to go ahead and put them together with super glue, and then I'll fill in these gaps here with plastic putty, then prime the body. So the super glue worked really well and fast, and you can actually eliminate a lot of those gaps by just pressing the pieces together while you're gluing this. So the only gap that is really noticeable is this one here. There are a few other minor ones, but yeah, for the most part, it pieced together really well. Okay, so on to priming, and let's get back to the face. Okay, so what I've done here is detailed the hair. I've added both highlights and shadows using the brown black for the main color, lightening that up for some of the highlights, and then using black for the shadows. Also filled in the eyes with ivory. That's the paint I started as a base color here. I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll proceed to painting the irises and the pupils. So I'm going to start work on the eyes here, and the first thing I did was to apply just a little pink coloration at the very corner to represent where the tear ducts are. And then what we're going to do is paint in now the iris, starting with a gray. My hope is that I can then fill in the rest of his eye color, which is a blue color, and leave a dark ring around the very edge of the iris there. Okay, so I have the head in this little vise here just to help with stability. And I'm using a brush here, at least the finest tip that I have here. And I'm going to start by just dotting where I think the center of the pupil will be. So this is how the eyes turned out, and again what I did was I started off with this blue-gray color, but you know, you could easily just start off with this stuff here. This is a Feel Blue color, and what I did after that was I then added this deep sky blue, but I did tone it down with some of the gray blue there, and then I added the pupil, and then the final touch was to add some of this glaze medium just to give some of the shine off the eye. I'm not sure you can see the reflection there. So I think it turned out pretty well. Right, I'm going to give this time to dry, but I think it's time now to move on to the body. Okay, well it's time to get started with painting the main body, and for the base color I'm going to use this Prussian blue. For the highlights we'll mix in this Ashen Blue, and for the shadows I'll mix in this deep Midnight Blue. Now, as you see, there are these detailings on the side of the torso and on the forearms, and I just watched the film again last night, and when you watch the movie, it looks like these are the same color as the suit, but kind of more of a metallic color. So I did buy this metallic blue, which I think would look really cool from my local hobby store here. And then for the S, I'll use a metallic red, and then for the yellow, I'm trying to decide between a gold or a brass color. Now, when you look at the suit on display, because you see pictures online of just the suit that's just displayed on its own, the trim here and on the forearms actually looks like a gunmetal. So I'm trying to decide which way to go there. But first, let's go ahead and apply the Prussian blue. And one other thing that I'm going to try this time around is I took a picture of the figure with the cape attached and a light source shining at a 12 o'clock position. And I'm going to use that as a guide as I apply the highlights and the shadows. Okay, so here we have the blue applied now. And what I'm going to do next is apply the highlights. Now, there's several ways that you can do this. Obviously, you can do it with an airbrush, but I've seen... My goal here is to try to learn how to paint this by hand. And I still may end up softening a lot of these areas up with an airbrush. But so what I'm going to do is start off with the highlights. And as I mentioned, I took a picture of the figure here. Just as a guide, you can see where the highlights are going to be here along the tops of the arms. So what I've done is I've mixed a 50-50 mix of the Prussian blue with our Ashen Blue to make a lighter color. We'll start with that. And I used this retarder here. Where did it go? There we go. This retarder medium to slow the drying process down, and hopefully that'll make it easier to blend as we go from light to dark there. So let's give this a try. Let's see what happens as I apply now the highlights. Alright, so this is how it's looking, and I'm going to let this dry before we start applying the shadows. Okay, it's now time to start on the shadows. So what I'm going to do is the same process as I did with the highlights. We're going to start off with a 50-50 mix of the dark Prussian blue and midnight, and then go to about 70-30 and then 80-20, and we'll see how that looks. Alright, so that's how it turned out, and I know you can't see the shadows too much because of the shadows from the light here, but certainly the highlights are more visible than the shadows are. So the next is to go ahead and let this dry, and then I'll get started on the detailing of the suit. Okay, and this is how the detailing turned out, and you can see it's a bit rough right now. I need to clean up all the areas where I got paint onto the suit. So that shouldn't be too hard to do, but if you're going to do this with this paint, I'd highly recommend using this retarder medium, because it does help to allow you to spread the paint more evenly and not make brush strokes look so obvious. So this again is the Mecha Color Metallic Blue. I think it works really well for this. And for the forearms, I'm actually going to airbrush those on. Well, now that the metallic blue is done, I can go ahead and move on to the chest symbol. I did not have to airbrush the armbands because, well, I couldn't because the tape wouldn't stick to the textured surface, so I had to end up hand brushing those, and I have to say the metallic paint went on quite nicely. So hopefully the red will work out just as well. Well, it turned out that the metallic red was a little too pink, and so after experimenting with different reds, I decided on just flat red. And for the yellow part, I ended up using Vallejo's gold. Alright, we're moving on to the final stage now, which is painting the cape. I think what I'm going to do is paint the underside here with black, because this is all supposed to be in a shade, and that'll help make the red appear darker. And I think for the outside, I'm going to highlight or paint the highlights with white and the shadow areas with black, kind of doing some pre-shading here, and hopefully that'll help as I apply the red color. Alright, so here we now have the completed cape, and I'm very happy with the results. I think the pre-shading was a good idea. Again, the technique here was to just apply, and I use Steinol Rest products here for this, their white primer for the peaked areas, and then we've got black primer along the recessed areas. And as you can see, it's very simple just to apply the paint with your airbrush, and because there's such nice contrast between those white and dark areas, you just apply your layers of red, and this is how it ends up looking. So I could have done this by hand. In fact, I did experiment a little bit. As I mentioned early on, my goal was to try to do this all by hand, but it really just wasn't turning out. Like I said, experimenting with just a paintbrush. So I just turned to my airbrush, and I'm very happy that I did. Alright, so this is the outside of the cape, and we've got the inside here just to show you what that looks like. But there's really not much left now. I'm going to go ahead and piece the figure together and work on the base, and I will show you the completed figure in just a second. Alright guys, well here we now have the completed figure, and I have to say I'm really pleased with the results. This again is a 1/9 scale Superman Man of Steel figure by Dragon Models. The figure is about 10 inches tall, and his cape spans over 13 inches from one tip to the other. So the build here was divided into two basic parts. We started off with the face and proceeded on to the body of the figure. And painting a face involves a lot more than just finding a skin tone and applying it, which honestly before I worked with any figures, I thought that's pretty much what you did. But as you saw here, you'll achieve really much better results by taking the time to apply multiple layers of varying shades. Here I started out with a beige red and built from there, adding a mix of lighter flesh tones and browns, and the goal is to try to duplicate the look of skin, which isn't an easy thing to do. I think I've learned a lot since I built my first figure, but there's really still a lot more to learn and to practice. And again, if you're interested in this at all, I would check out Darren Carnall's YouTube channel or Patreon channel. You'll quickly see that it takes a lot of patience to achieve lifelike results, but if you take the time to apply to different layers, you'll be much happier with your results. And what I did here was really just a much abbreviated version of what he does. I just really used tips and advice from his videos, but I think overall the results came out pretty decent. I think one strong point of the figure is certainly the detailed suit that you see here with the body. The suit, as you can see, is molded to replicate the look of the suit as we see in the film, and I think they did a pretty good job with that. I did find it helpful, however, to have that textured surface as I was applying the highlights and the shadows. It really made it easy to blend from one tone to the next. I haven't found this as easy to do on a smooth surface, but that's a technique that I really want to try to work on mastering. I did find it helpful also to take a picture of the assembled figure on an overhead light source. This was really a good thing to be able to refer to as I was applying the highlights and the shadows. Another strong feature of the model is the sculpt of the cape. I think that really turned out well, especially with the pre-shading. The pre-shading really helped out, and it stands out nicely when the model is lit from above. So let me take a second to recap the colors that I used here. For the suit, the base color was Vallejo's Prussian Blue, and for the highlights I mixed in Master Series Paint's Ashen Blue, and for the shadows, Americana's Midnight Blue. And then for the chest symbol, I used flat red also for the S, and Vallejo's Gold for the yellow area that surrounds it. The suit was then finished off with Tamiya's Pearl Clear Coat. This is something I really would highly recommend. If you watch the film, which I did before assembling the figure, the suit looks a bit shiny and pearlescent, and I think this coating does a great job with giving the figure a similar look. For the face, I used quite a mix of Vallejo's paints, starting with their beige red, also mixing in sunny skin tone, flat flesh, salmon rose, and pale flesh from their game color line. So for the hair color, I ended up using Vallejo's German Sea Black Brown versus just making it jet black. And this was something I decided to use after watching Darren Carnall's video of his Kylo Ren's head and face painting. Although Superman, I know, again, has really black hair, I thought that the brown mix here would serve well for the highlights. And finally, these are the colors I used for the eyes. Lastly, I wanted to show you the display base. This is the base that the model comes with. It's this hollow round piece here with a metal rod. The rod is about 6 inches in length with a bend on each side. I'm not sure why it's shipped that way because the rod is way too long for this figure. What I ended up doing was trimming the rod and also removing the bend, because when I left the bend in place, the figure would lean to one side, and that's a lot of weight to put on one leg. I also decided not to go with the round base, but rather with this heavier block of plastic that I had here. I just thought it would be a bit sturdier, and it works out really well, as you can see. Alright, well I guess that's a wrap for this project, and I hope you enjoyed following along. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.